Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sean Watkins, and I serve as Associate Dean of Lifelong Learning here at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. And I want to welcome you to another edition of Cultivating Ideas, where we take the best and brightest ideas of our faculty and staff and share them with you, both in Austin and in Texas, around the nation, and ultimately, hopefully, prayerfully, around the world. I am very excited for my colleague to be able to share today, the Reverend Dr. Crystal Silva-McCormick is a professor of missions and evangelism and the director of Latinx studies here at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. She is a prophetic voice in helping students think through what it means to live practically, holistically, and theologically in the 21st century as they get ready to step into the mission and pastorate in various parts around the United States and the world. Today, she's going to be speaking on this topic of South Africa and Palestine, sister struggles. So super excited for her. Sounds like a very relevant topic given what's happening in the nation and around the world. And so with that being said, Crystal, by all means, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Sean, for that generous introduction. And I'm going to share screen with you all. I'm also going to invite at times for you to unmute or enter in the chat some words if you are up for that, those of you here. Let me share screen. Okay, so I want to just start by saying that I named these sister struggles as a reminder that they have overlap and that Black South Africans have identified their struggle with Palestine. And so that's kind of the theme and the crux of what we'll be exploring today, but they are not identical. So I want to say that. But the point is to sort of locate and name how South Africans, when learning about Palestine, when visiting Palestine, saw their own struggles there and what that might mean for us as we navigate a world that has many injustices taking place at the same time. And so we'll close kind of with reflections on that. But first, I also want to situate myself and invite you to situate yourself. So I am not South African. I am not Palestinian. And so what gives me sort of the power to be sharing these stories? What is my relationship to these struggles? And so I have relationships with Palestinians, and I have some relationships with South Africans. But again, those are not my communities. Those are not the communities where I come from. So these are not the struggles that I have survived or navigated. So what I would like to say that as a historian, a minister, a Christian, and an activist, that what I like to name that I am doing is bearing witness. I am bearing witness to what I have seen. I'm bearing witness to what those that I am in relationship with have shared with me, their stories, their family stories, and I'm also a historian. And so part of being a historian, I would suggest, means that you bear witness to a history that is not just in the past, but that is ongoing because history always has continued cycles and consequences. It's not just linear. And so I invite us to think about history in that way. And I invite all of us here to think about what it means to bear witness, to share someone else's story with as much humility and honor and respect as possible, and to share it with as many people as possible, right? So when we understand something that is unjust, I believe we have a responsibility and an obligation to share that with as many people as possible. So that is situating myself. And so I don't know what your own knowledge and relationship is to these oppressions and to the people who have survived and navigated these oppressions. But just be thinking about that today. And then afterwards, if you want to learn more, if what it means for you to bear witness to these things. So I want to say one of my first conversation partners is Thandi Gamedze, and someone that I have heard speak and who's an incredible human. and is a South African educator, theologian, a poet, just an incredible speaker. And what she names very recently in an article she wrote for Contending Modernities is that the South African apartheid state and the Israeli state are a case of inter-racist solidarity. So I want to say that again. So as a South African, she names what the way that the state of Israel functions, which is different than for those of us who are Christian and often hear the word Israel and think of biblical Israel. The modern state is fundamentally something different. Okay, so when we hear the state of Israel and what Dr. Gamedze is referring to is a modern state, and its laws and the way that it functions is an apartheid state, and she names it as an inter-racist solidarity in the way that South Africa functioned by oppressing Black South Africans and relegating them to a lesser status. So she says this term aptly describes the way that current US white Afrikaners, right? So if you didn't know or don't remember, President Trump was going to allow which immigrants? So not Latino, not people from Haiti, but white Afrikaners, right? And so what she does in this article is she connects the white superiority in the way that these systems function, not just in their individual locales, but globally, right? This idea of white superiority or people's fear that white people are losing power. And so apartheid South Africa and Israeli apartheid functions in these similar ways, as she says, an inter-racist solidarity, because in Israel, as she identifies, is a function where Palestinians, Arabs, those who are Muslim, those who are Palestinian Christian, have a lesser status in Israeli society, in laws, and in other structures, which we'll talk about more. So I want to stop there and see if there are any questions about that. Um, this is that was a lot. So just see if there are any questions, anything for clarity as Dr. Gamedze gets us into this concept of an inter-racist solidarity between South African apartheid, which ended in the 90s, and Israeli apartheid, which is continues and is ongoing and growing in its violence and structures. Okay, I'm going to move on. Okay, so this is where I'll invite you, just unmute if you'd like. What comes to mind for any of you here when you hear the word apartheid? Anyone? What is it? I'm not asking for a definition necessarily, right? But what comes to mind? What have you learned about apartheid? What does
I
it mean?
think I immediately think about South Africa, Nelson Mandela, and I think just the realities that it didn't end until the late 20th century. That for me was the
Mhm.
most shocking, that there was that level of systemic and legalized racism that really didn't end until the 1980s. So that's kind of what comes to mind for me when I think of apartheid.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. And I'll note also the chat, um, segregation.
The
Um,
racism that is still alive and well.
yes, yes, thank you. So racism that is alive and well, and we see that in both Israeli society and South African society, that racism exists both in formal structures and then in informal. So in culture, right? In the way people are viewed, the way they are spoken about in the media, those things. So thank you. That's perfect. Segregation and separation, forced removal. Um, Bantu yes. And then also someone named divestment or disinvestment and boycotts, which we will get to as well. So all of these things start coming to mind, right? The way that these structures work and function, and then the disinvestment, the boycotts, the ways in which apartheid fell in South Africa, the ways in which people are naming and asking for people to participate in an end to Israeli apartheid through boycott and divestment, but it still exists right now and has become more, I would say, it's grown with a greater ferocity. So as we look at, thank you for naming those things, but apartheid South Africa, how did that look? As someone named in the chat, the Bandut stands, systems of legally enforced racial segregation. So we can even think about parallels with segregation in the US, right? Separate water fountains, separate movie theaters, separate restaurants for white South Africans and Black South Africans. And even though white persons were the minority, they were in charge, and they had and actually still continue to have, even post the fall of apartheid, ownership of the majority of the land in South Africa. But as someone named, I think it was Estella, said racism. What's interesting about apartheid systems, right, is that powers find a way to institutionalize the racism, which we do see in the US still, in the Black community in the US will be one of the first to give testament to how that has always existed, which privileges whites over Black South Africans in apartheid. And it was created, it goes back not actually to the 20th century, but we can go back to 17th century Dutch Reformed Christianity, for entering into South Africa and beginning to want to kill and displace the native South African, Black South African population. So it sort of evolves and then becomes institutionalized, in 1948, but it was a slow process of racism and other forms of finding ways to erase the native population or to subjugate them, right? So those are key features of like colonialist structures. We'll talk about another term, settler colonialism, with more detail, but colonialism, right, is where one population comes and subjugates another and works to erase their culture, steal their land, subjugate them. But what you find with apartheid is, as you'll see in this slide, and you look at that image, it becomes codified. So when Black South Africans are trying to navigate housing, employment, education, marriage, political rights, to navigate the economy, there are all sorts of ways that they're relegated to less than second class. And so this is very similar to what you see in Israel for Palestinians, right? Palestinians exist under these structures where they have less or no political rights, depending on where they're living in the territories, what it means to access housing or to lose housing, employment. And so the way that Israeli apartheid functions is very similar to South African apartheid. And what's interesting then is that you have South Africans. I have an image here of Frank Chikane, who first went to Palestine and Israel in 1988. Okay, so think about how far back that was. And his first visit, I don't have this on the slide, but I heard him speak last summer. He said, when I went, he invited the audience to reflect with him. He said, he said, I want to hear the Israeli perspective and I want to hear the Palestinian perspective. And he said, I was imagining, kind of chastising himself a little, that this was a two sides issue, two peoples with the same equal power that just couldn't get along. And he said, I wanted to investigate. And I looked, and he said, I realized that this was exactly like the structure that I had been trying to survive. And then he said, and actually, okay, so 1988, he said, it's worse. Okay, so if in 1988, Frank Chikane identified Israeli apartheid as worse than South African apartheid, how many decades out are we now? And international law and international authorities have not intervened in the continued land theft, the killing, and the modern state of Israel growing the amount of land it has stolen and taken from Palestinians. So again, that's something really that should sit with us. If in 1988, Frank Chicani says this is worse than apartheid, can we only imagine what it is now, many decades later? He has asked the church and the world to intervene, just as Palestinians have, and they're to no avail. Right? So Israel has violated international law, not just, I'm not even speaking about the past few years and in this current war against Iran, the US and Israeli war against Iran that have already violated international law, including bombing schools and hospitals and airports. We are talking about the international law being violated of growing settlements. So if you don't know what a settlement is this land that belongs to Palestinians, the Israeli government, those that move from elsewhere in the world move to Israel, become citizens, and then take that land and build infrastructure so that Palestinians cannot have that land anymore. And they are forced off their land. Sometimes they are forced to destroy their own land with threat of death. So Frank Chicani is a Christian minister and at one time the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches. He asked for people to participate in boycott, sanction, and divestment. And this is how apartheid South Africa fell, right? Where people boycotted the participation of South Africa in sports. So you may have heard that recently, people saying, don't allow Israel to participate in soccer matches, for example. Not participating in purchasing products made there, right? And so you would see if we see the parallels, this doesn't seem at all like a controversial act, right? It seems like a very natural ask to say to people the way to end this system in a nonviolent way is to withhold money so that this structure cannot continue to exist. So that is what he asked for. I want to name Desmond Tutu as well. So Desmond Tutu has been well known for a lot of things, but we want to name here especially that he also named what was happening in Israel as apartheid over the Palestinians. And he was one of also the first global Christian leaders to apply this analogy. And so I have two quotes that I want to share with you that he said, "I have been deeply distressed in my visit to the Holy Land." He said, "It reminded me so much of what happened to us Black people in South Africa." And he also said, "You," and he's referring to the state of Israel, "are doing the very things we criticize the apartheid government of doing to us." And he supported BDS. And what I want us to notice, whether someone is Christian or not, that these ministers felt that it was their religious and spiritual conviction, moral obligation to participate in boycott, divestment, and sanction as a moral and ethical way to fight apartheid. And so for them, it was just a very natural Christian thing to do. We need to boycott. We need to withhold our economic power so that this system falls. And these are the same calls that you will hear on behalf of Palestine. So you can easily find apps, you can find lists of goods to avoid. Right now is the holy month of Ramadan, and a lot of dates come from farms that are stolen Palestinian land. So a lot of times people are warned, don't buy your dates from Israeli farms. Make sure they don't come from Israel, for example. So these Christian ministers who experienced apartheid have been calling the Christian church and others to solidarity with Palestinians because they identified the way that the Israeli government functions and its laws against Palestinians or over Palestinians as apartheid. And so the call was to support boycott, divestment, and sanction. Another important figure is Alan Bosak, South African Dutch Reform clergy. And so he also identified the same thing. The struggle of the Palestinian people is a struggle against the same injustice we face in South Africa. And so this is really telling because when we look at even elementary school education in the US, middle school and high school, it is very easy for teachers to teach children about South Africa and apartheid. And of course, everyone is on the same page. We condemn this. This is wrong. This is obviously wrong. It doesn't take a lot to assess this. So the question that, we can visit towards the end of, but should be it's not a question for continued reflection, is why is it that difficult to apply that to Palestine when these South Africans who survived apartheid and lived through it identified what Israel is doing and the way it functions as apartheid? So if they are saying this, if this is what they are bearing witness to, why is it difficult for the rest of the world to make this identification? And as I named, Frank Chikane said this in 1988. Why decades later has the world not intervened? Why decades later has the world not come together and used boycott, divestment, and sanction to end apartheid, but instead has funded it, actually, right? So same or similar struggles, or according to Frank Chikane, right, worse in Israel. The situation is worse for Palestinians, he said, and yet still people are not willing to make these comparisons when South Africans have made them themselves. So I want to show you this image. And in it, it tells a big story, I think, in just one image. There's a Palestinian woman being stopped by Israeli soldiers. A fact that, some people might not know is that everyone in Israeli society must be a soldier, must serve time as a soldier. So that's why you have young kids as, young as 18 holding these guns and stopping people at checkpoints, Palestinians. You see the fencing wall, which separates Palestinians and Israelis. Often these barriers continue to be constructed through Palestinian land, right? It doesn't matter if it's land that belongs to Palestinians, they will construct it through there. It makes it very difficult for Palestinians to navigate just going home or from city to city. So a trip that should take 20 minutes will probably take multiple hours because of checkpoints, which we'll look at images of, because of these barriers. And there are separate roads, right? So sometimes people don't realize that there are separate roads. There are roads for Israelis that Palestinians cannot drive on. Okay. So, and this is not very dated, a little dated, Amnesty International's 2022 report that named the cruel system of domination and crime against humanity as apartheid. So this report said laws, policies, institutional practices all work to expel, fragment, and dispossess Palestinians of their land, property, and deprive Palestinians of human rights. So again, and this is not new. So this report is from 2022, but this is only a more recent report naming this. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Nakba, but that's an important term that if you want to explore, read about more. But the Nakba means catastrophe in Arabic. And a date that we can keep in mind is 1948, parallels South Africa's official apartheid as well. But 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes violently with militias. And this is how the state of Israel was formed. So we think, oh, 1948, the Nakba catastrophe, this is a day to mourn or a year to mourn. And this is when Israel celebrates its founding. So this is why for Palestinians, it is not a day of celebration. And the Nakba, I think, is important to recognize is ongoing. This displacement for Palestinians is ongoing, and it started before 1948. because there were militias and there were leaders that were forming the state of Israel, that if you look at their writings, for example, Ben-Gurion, um, who said we need to squeeze them out like rats. So the intention wasn't, it would be different, right? If people come, which is immigration, to a place and want to live alongside people. And of course, there were always Jews, Muslims, Christians, and Druze, D-R-U-Z-E, living together in the region. But when you start bringing people that displace a population, that is something different. And then you displace them, and those that remain have to live under different set of societal structures. This is indeed apartheid. And this happens through land theft ongoing. The checkpoints, the separation walls I showed you, the separate roads. Settlers come from all over the world. So these are people who come from all over the world and are allowed to become Israeli citizens and steal land. And so this is quick 1 minute. I hope it doesn't make us watch the ad.
Check in, chill out. Discover
It does.
your degree of chill at Moody Gardens, Galveston Island. Are you super chill, like a mom at the spa or lounging poolside?
You are stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
No, no one is allowed to steal it, يا عمي. Yaakov, you know this is not your house.
Yes, but if I go, you don't go back. So what's the problem? Why are you yelling at me? I didn't do this. I didn't do this.
But
It's easy to yell at me, but I didn't do this.
you are stealing my house.
I'm going to stop that there. I wanted to show that quick clip because that's only a small glimpse, a slice of the way that land theft occurs. Other times, the Israeli soldiers come with big caterpillar machinery and just start destroying homes after they've told the family to evacuate. And in other instances, this is especially in villages, which if you haven't seen, I would recommend the documentary No Other Land, where settlers from all over the world go to villages where Bedouins live or Palestinian farmers, and they make outposts and they start living there. But they're not content with that. They will steal the land, and they want the land that already belongs to Palestinians, so they have burned their animals, their livestock, so they don't have a way to make a living. They burn their vehicles. They walk into their homes and they destroy what's in their homes. And when soldiers or police are called, they side with the settlers, right? So there are no consequences for doing this, and the settlers are armed. So they have killed people, also with no consequences, and Palestinians are not armed. They are not allowed to own arms, okay? So you might hear all these things about Gaza and Hamas being in Gaza. That's a separate conversation because Gaza was isolated by Israel many years ago and has been bombed. This genocide has been the worst, but it has been bombed before. The last time was 2014. So Gaza would be a separate conversation when people talk about armed resistance, but in the other Palestinian territories, there isn't armed resistance. So you have Palestinians who have their homes stolen, their lives destroyed, people jailed, people killed with no recourse whatsoever, okay, and no way to defend themselves. I did want to cite theologian Mitri Rahab, as I named colonialism earlier, but I want to name settler colonialism in the way that he describes it in his book. I have the book here, Decolonizing Palestine, the Land, the People, and the Bible, which I highly recommend. That he really helps Christians identify the way that support for the modern state really is justified through a lot of Christian theological language and through use of scripture, or misuse, I should say. So The way that he describes settler colonialism is different than just colonialism, right? Colonists or colonialists establish and enforce state sovereignty and judicial control over indigenous land, ultimately aiming to eliminate the native people. That's what we're seeing in real time in all the Palestinian territories. The natives become extraneous while the settlers are cast as the natives through different political mechanisms, ideological constructs, and social narratives. And scripture is a big part of that. And so the indigenous land is described as terra nullius, which means empty. That is the same phrase that settlers used in the US when there were indigenous people here in what was Turtle Island. They described the land as empty. Even though there were people, they didn't consider them human beings, right? So they said terra nullius, empty. Okay, I'm looking at time. I want to show you just a couple images of apartheid, right? So this is apartheid in the modern state of Israel. Walls, checkpoints, and these only apply to Palestinians. And you can see a tower on the image on the left where soldiers surveil people all day and sometimes shoot them with rubber bullets or other bullets, maiming them, killing them. This is a regular thing. And there are refugee camps, right, that exist in the Palestinian territories and have existed since 1948, since that iteration of the Nakba, the ongoing Nakba. These towers exist in the refugee camps and people are killed all the time, including children at refugee camps. So if you ever tour one of these refugee camps, you will see the faces of children, art on the walls, and that is in honor of their memory because they've been shot and killed indiscriminately. Sometimes soldiers will say it was an accident. Sometimes they will say, oh, I saw them with a rock. Yes, so a lot of things that just are not true. So if you see the separation wall and if you ever visit Palestine, the art on the wall tells a story, right? So if you've ever been to any of the separation walls between the US and Mexico and you look at the art tells you a story, even if you don't know the full history of the region. And I would suggest to you that you look at the art. If you don't visit Palestine, look at images on the internet, and the art will tell you a story that you can find in the history books without reading the history books, namely that there is one entity with more power that subjugates another people, the Palestinians. So I want to show you this a quick, because this is another way that apartheid functions in Israel over Palestine. We won't watch the whole video, but I just want you to understand the depths of apartheid in Palestine.
This is Ramallah, the de facto administrative capital of Palestine, situated in the occupied West Bank, a region renowned for arid conditions and water scarcity. Yet Ramallah receives an average annual rainfall of 615 millimeters, which is more than London. Despite this, Palestinians in the West Bank receive an insufficient amount of water to meet their basic needs, roughly 80 litres a day, far short of the 100 litres recommended by the WHO. And in Gaza, the situation is far worse. As a result of Israel's bombing campaign, Palestinians in Gaza can only access between 2 to 3 litres of water a day, and this water isn't necessarily clean or safe to drink. Even before the current conflict, 97% of Gaza's water was unfit for human consumption. In contrast, Israelis have access to an average of 300 litres of clean water per day. This stark imbalance has its roots in how Israel took control of the region's water, and by doing so, created an unprecedented health crisis.
Okay, I'm going to stop that there. This is for such a quick time that we have here is my hope is to give the audience and anyone that would see this glimpses of what apartheid looks like in Israel so that you can identify the ways in which Israel controls every facet of Palestinian life. Movement, water, education, economy, fear, because someone can come to your home and jail you, right? The US is seeing that with ICE. that someone can just come to your home or your business or find you on the street and jail you, and you didn't do anything wrong, right? What's being said here in the US is that it has to do with immigration status. And the way that Israel uses this is, oh, maybe we're investigating. Maybe someone posted something on the internet. Maybe someone threw a rock. So Israel has been known as notoriously known as the only nation in the world, and now I'm sure joined by the US, but that detains children. Okay, and so um, I mentioned refugee camps. I'll go back to that, but this slide has a lot of details. I won't read them all, but this is some facts about the way that children are detained. Okay, so this can apply largely to Palestinian men, which are often a target of the Israeli government for no reason, right? There doesn't have to be a reason. You don't have to have any sort of judicial processes. You can just be detained because Palestinians live under military law and Israelis live under civil law. And so children are bound, blindfolded, sleep deprived, and taken into prisons with adults. And they're tortured, mistreated, and this happens all the time. And so a lot of Palestinians refer to those that are in Israeli prisons as political prisoners because they are often taken, most often for no crime. They have committed no crimes at all. And if you look at the organization, there's an organization called B'Tselem, and there's another one, Breaking the Silence, where you have one is a human rights organization, one is former Israeli soldiers that confess and have said, we were asked to do these type of things just to terrorize Palestinians. So the other way that apartheid in Israel functions is the use of striking fear. You can be arrested at any time. Your home can be taken or destroyed. And you can be let out of prison and then taken right back. So another way that apartheid functions is just like you don't have control and you are supposed to be afraid. You're supposed to be afraid of Israeli occupation. So the indiscriminate killings, this killing happened last November. Jed, this child was killed. An Israeli soldier said he threw a rock, and a video was shown of an Israeli soldier dropping a rock by the child's body when he was already shot, 14 years old. And this is a very common story. So this is one of countless. And the other feature of this, which is part of the way Israel functions, is the child was left to bleed out. Okay, and medical assistance is impeded. This is very common, not allowing Palestinians through checkpoints, through ambulances, or stopping the ambulances. Doesn't matter if someone's giving birth, having a heart attack. This child was left to bleed out, and he is not unique. This is a very common story. So these are the threads, right, that make up Israeli apartheid. So I want to just not just pause, but invite you all to think about. That was a lot of information, but these are things that I think if you did know, encouraging you to share them and to find ways to tell this story, to bear witness to the way that this not only exists, but how it parallels South Africa, but also how South Africans bear witness and testify, hey, this is worse than what we've experienced, because that is also a way to help people understand what has been happening in Palestine and Israel for decades, right? And as I mentioned earlier, it's so easy, even in our education systems. Okay, we can talk about apartheid South Africa, but if I say Israeli apartheid, people panic. And it's not difficult. It is not difficult. It is not complicated. It's actually very clear and very easy. But we have to find what are the barriers that people don't want to accept the facts that we just looked at, that we just talked about. That's where we get to the barriers. The barriers are not, this doesn't exist, it's hard to prove, there aren't parallels. That's not the case. There are other reasons. I want to invite you all to share how do you see these South African theologians connecting their struggle to the struggle of Palestinians? What do you think might be helpful, I guess, to share with people about how these parallel? If you want to share in the chat, or if you want to unmute.
Hello. I'd like to confess that I popped in about halfway into
Okay,
this entire session. I had a meeting and then I popped in around 12:30. So,
that's okay.
yeah, so my understanding of this entire presentation is marred by my lack of attendance.
That's totally okay. I mean, I believe a recording goes up on our website and the slides can be shared. And I think, it's helpful maybe you say that. And just a recap, as we looked at South Africans, Black South Africans who, when they visited Palestine, said, hey, this is the same system that we've lived under. And in some cases, these Black South African leaders said, actually, this is worse than the systems that we lived under. And then we just kind of looked at what does Palestine look like that it's named apartheid by these leaders, if that's helpful.
It is helpful. I mean, I don't really have any questions regarding it. I'm still trying to process everything, but
Sure, sure.
I just want to say that I appreciate the work that you do. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for being here and this conversation, being part of this conversation. Maybe it would be helpful also, I have this page here. There are countless resources and countless incredible scholars. One here is not here, Noor Masalha, who's written extensively about the formation of the State of Israel, the Nakba. But I want to share these on this slide as recommended resources, Palestinian Christian Voices, also this guide here. If you want some resource to be able to equip you to talk about what apartheid looks like, this is an excellent resource put together by Al Jazeera that shows here, for example, land theft, the different territories that exist that Israel has relegated to parts A, B, and C, or areas A, B, and C after the Oslo Accords. It gives you data about settlements, control of housing. And so this is a really excellent resource if you say, like, I want to know more, and maybe somebody wants data and some more facts, then this resource is on the last slide. Let me see, go back to the slide.
One thing that came up for me listening to the presentation, the having vocabulary to name a system or like apartheid, that gives us so much context and a grounding to what's going on. And I know that there's a movement to kind of have Nekba be the same. The ongoing Nekba is displacement for the unique experience of Palestinians as well.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be a really interesting thing as history sort of unfolds to see if future scholars are unfortunately using the Nekba then as sort of a beginning launch pad to understand new devastating conflicts in the future in other areas. But apartheid for me is a word like that. It's a word that applies very robustly to this, but as you laid out. But Nekba, I think, is going to be a new additional word to help as a new vocabulary in and of itself of describing the Palestinian experience too.
Very helpful. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Rachel, as well too. Crystal, if I can chime in too and ask you a question, I think I'm very curious your thoughts from one missiologist to another. I think I'm curious about well, one, like, as horrible as all of this is, I think what's surprising to me, one, is that none of it is new. I think Dr. Richard Miller talks about there being 5 links in a chain of a destruction of a community. We always identify a people group that we can blame our problems on. We marginalize that community. They are over-policed, and then we start to round them up into internment or concentration camps, and then ultimately we just start to see mass executions. And so we see this happening time and time again, I think, in history. What's surprising for me, I think, is that there are marginalized communities that experience this type of legalized state-sanctioned violence, whether it's through genocide, enslavement, forced removals, etc. They tend to fall into one of two categories on a spectrum, right? There's this category of this commitment to never again. And I think that's really what we see from these South African theologians who have just straight said, regardless of consequences, regardless of if we lose power or influence or funding, what is happening to Palestinians is unacceptable. We remember apartheid here, and we will stand in solidarity with them, regardless of the ways in which we may differ. One thing that we do agree on is their humanity. So there's one side. But then the other side, which I feel like is marginalized groups who have experienced also state-sanctioned violence, don't stand in solidarity, decide that the safest bet for them is to have proximity to power. And I would say not all of Israel, but definitely much of Israel, or at least Benjamin Netanyahu and his administration's leadership, right, for them to come out of World War II, for them to come out of the atrocities that happened during World War II. It seems like that administration has said the safest course of action for us is to not stand in solidarity with the powerless, but rather to wield power and to also do harm to communities when their collective memory, they should know better. So I'm just kind of curious, what are your thoughts about that? Why do we find marginalized communities vacillating between these two opinions of either we remember what it's like to be oppressed and we will stand with the oppressed no matter what, or this other side of we were oppressed and now we're going to hold on to power and we'll do the oppressing ourselves because we would much rather, to quote Mark Carney incorrectly, they'd much rather have a seat at the table than be on the menu. Can you speak to that? What's going on with these communities that they're choosing to do harm as opposed to help eliminating harm as we step into the 21st century? Any thoughts at all?
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you, Rachel, also for naming the Nakba as
Yeah.
its unique, unfortunately, unique form of violence because it is so ongoing and because it is
Yes.
not the end to this system of violence or systems is not supported by the world. It's funded to continue, which is the opposite of what happened with South Africa. And thank you, Sean, because of what you name, I would say there are multiple things. So I wanted to cite Gabor Mate, who is a trauma doctor, but he is Jewish and he does not support the state of Israel. And he speaks about generational trauma, but he does talk about, right? So the reality that the Jewish community has the generational trauma around the Holocaust, as Indigenous communities have generational trauma around genocides that were committed there, the Congolese people, other communities around the globe that have suffered and survived genocides have this generational trauma. And as you named, we as humans have a choice then what we do. Do we sort of hunker down and just be concerned about our safety, or do we connect that suffering, that pain, to the suffering and pain of others to ensure that it doesn't happen to anyone, instead of retreating to our own desires for power or our own desires or beliefs in what safety and security looks like. Because often what is cited as far as the state of Israel is that this is required for safety and security. But in fact, it's violence. It's everything we named and we looked at as violence. So what we're having is a modern state say we are enforcing this for safety and security, but it's enforcing violence. And I would also cite the author Mark Ellis, who was unfortunately died about 2 years ago. And he wrote decades ago that this would happen, meaning that Israel's violence would proliferate and that it would divide the Jewish community globally. And so he said, we cannot do this because it was done to us, right? So he identified the way that Palestinians were being treated by the state of Israel a long time ago. And I will say that unfortunately you have, fortunately you have some really strong activists within the state of Israel who support Palestinians and who risk a lot, their own safety and livelihood to do that. But more recent polls show that over 80% of the population supports the displacement, the ethnic cleansing, and even the genocide in Gaza. So what you have is a culture that has proliferated to support these ideas that Gabor Mate is speaking against. And so you also, I think as Estella maybe named this, racism is cultural. And so what's required for this to change is for apartheid to fall and for there to be cultural shift within the psyche of Israelis.
Crystal, I wanted to ask, so to me, it's very evident the parallels between Palestine and apartheid South Africa. But for some reason, I feel like this topic and this comparison has not been very loudly highlighted, I guess. I mean, this is one of the few panels that I've attended where that is being linked. And I'm not saying it's not happening, but I'm surprised that given that it is a pretty widely acknowledged and accepted example of apartheid, is it happening in like smaller circles that if you're really in the know, you know, or is it just really like why are we not hearing more about this connection?
Mhm. I mean, I think that's a good question. And I mean, the best I have are guesses because when I think about where I was exposed to this was by my relationships or through my relationships with Palestinian Christians and their relationships with South Africans, whether through they go to South Africa and they visit the Bandustans and see the inequality that continues to exist even post-apartheid in South African society, and they have cultivated relationships. So I think that that feels really affirming that they bear witness to each other's suffering. And so that's how I came to knowledge of this. And so I would say that it's not talked about for barriers that we haven't named here, which is I think people are eager, just like they are eager to endorse Martin Luther King Jr. when maybe decades ago a lot of those same people would not have. They're eager to say, "Oh yeah, South African apartheid is horrible. We need to boycott, divest, and sanction." And then you say, "Oh look, that's like look at all those parallels. We need to do the same thing." And then there are a number of reasons that people will come up with, including naming some people name boycott, divestment, and sanction as anti-Semitic when it's not at all about Judaism, it's about the modern state of Israel. The rub then comes when people identify Judaism with the modern state of Israel, which some do. Some people who are Jewish do that, but as I said, there are plenty of Jews who do not. It's not the majority, but it is a fracture within Judaism, and I think that that's why people don't want to talk about it because immediately the conversation will start leading towards accusations of anti-Semitism or the like. As opposed to just what we laid out here. The parallels are very clear. This is not about attacking the Jewish community. This is attacking a modern state that has implemented systems that are worse than apartheid South Africa.
My goodness, a relevant and very, very, very helpful topic of conversation. Let me say, if we've got time for maybe one more question before we conclude our time, definitely want to thank Rachel and Sadia as well for their incredible questions, reflections, and contributions, especially the folks in the chat as well too. Thank you all so much. Any final questions that we may have? We've got time maybe for one more, and then I'll invite Crystal to give closing remarks if no one else has anything else to say. It's a great question. One of our incredible staff, Usama, has asked, does Austin Seminary do any travel seminars to Palestine? That's a great question. Crystal, I will toss that one back to you. You can answer that and then also give concluding remarks.
Okay, thank you all. And thank you, Sadia, for your excellent question. Those are my best guesses, by the way, but we can keep considering and keep sharing the parallels to see if that is helpful for people to think this through. And yes, thank you for the question about travel seminars. I do take groups of students, and I will be doing that June 9th through 18th. I do understand that right now, because of the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran and other regions of the world, things are precarious. We would not go if it compromised anyone's safety, and I have relationships with partners that do this all the time, and they care about our safety. So if you are interested, you should email me, and we'll keep you in the loop. I'm going to get updates every week, and the trip for now is moving forward with all its plans, its itinerary, everything. If the trip is canceled, we'll probably do that the first week of April, let people know that it's canceled.
On that note, is it open to non-students?
Oh, yes, definitely. Sorry, I should have said this is open to anyone in the community and to students. So it does not matter if you are a student or not. You can do this travel seminar as an auditor, and we absolutely welcome that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm putting my email. Okay, my email is in the chat.
So would it be okay for us to let, like, say, a church group or our community, faith community, know about this trip? And then if anyone's interested, they would just reach out to you?
Absolutely. Please invite them to email me, ask any questions they want to, inquire. I'm happy to share information with them, any questions they have. But I would encourage that. I mean, we want to take a large group. So I encourage if you share it with whoever, and I don't think it would happen that we'd have to close it, but that would be the worst case scenario, is we say we have too many. So we'd rather have a larger group go.
Wonderful. And that is a great place for us to be able to pause. I want to thank Reverend Dr. Crystal Silva-McCormick for a very helpful and timely lecture, given what's happening in our society right now and around the world as we're increasingly seeing international conflicts, but our hearts that are going out to the horrendous atrocities that have happened to the Palestinian people and the land of Palestine as well, too. Our thoughts and prayers and wishes for them, and also our support both in volunteering and financial services as well too. If you're interested in looking for ways to be able to support them, there are a number of organizations that are taking donations to be able to help in the rebuilding of Palestinian culture and life and society that's there, in addition to some other international communities that are trying to stand in solidarity with these folks. So it's a long conversation and a long road for recovery, and the global community needs to step up in solidarity with them to make sure what happened in the past does not continue to happen in the present and in the future. So thank you again, Crystal, for this timely and helpful word. That's going to conclude our Cultivating Ideas for the month of March. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we will see you next month. Take care, everyone. Have a fantastic day.